I just wanted to highlight a couple of trends that we're seeing which might be relevant to today's discussion. One is just the sheer growth of the number of devices which are connected, which this year should actually start to exceed the number of people in the world for the first time ever, which is incredible. But by 2020, that number should reach 50 billion. So the potential for connected devices for M2M, I think, is an absolutely huge area. And for example, in the US, we've seen that they are implementing a smart grid, allowing electricity service providers to monitor electricity, which is costing them about 4.5 billion. So they really believe in this stuff, and it's really starting to make a difference. Another trend that we're seeing is big data. More and more data is being collected, it's becoming more and more useful. Obviously there's privacy concerns, but there's also a huge potential to that. And it's been estimated that Europe's public sector that has a potential annual value of $250 billion. We're doing various things in this area, one of which is city planning in Turkey, not strictly Europe, but what we're looking at is how we use data to improve transportation around the city. So that's another thing that we might be thinking about, how we use all of this big data in a really positive way in the public sector. Another obvious one perhaps is mHealth, something that we're seeing more and more actually in the emerging markets and starting to see over here. And in the UK alone, mHealth programmes have the potential to save the NHS £750 million per annum, which equates to 95 doctors per hospital. So this can, you talk about scale, this can really reach scale. And the final one I wanted to highlight was smart working. And again, this is something which obviously mobile can facilitate. It's already been proven to deliver massive reductions in travel and property costs up to about 40%. And I think it's another area where it also has particular advantages on a gender basis. So public sectors are starting to look more and more at how they use smart working within their organisations. Another element of that might be how you pay public sector workers. So those are just some of the thoughts, some of the things that we're seeing coming out. Huge potential, I think, for the public sector in this area. Obviously both on a big scale, but also on a more individual, smaller scale. So it'd be really interesting to see what comes out of this workshop today. I mean, there are a number of solutions in the mHealth area, from simple data collection, M2M, to linking up machines that they're talking to each other. I think from the European perspective, it tends to be more around efficiency. From the emerging market perspective, it tends to be more about access to doctors, because in Kenya, I think it's 1 to 90,000 is the doctor-patient ratio, or something like that. So having any access to a doctor is an amazing thing. The other thing that we're seeing, and this will probably come out from the Spanish workshops, is the ability to connect older people to doctors. So being able to connect via telemedicine, where they are talking to a doctor, but they don't have to go through the travel, they don't have to go to hospital every day, they don't have to be exposed to more risks through infections. That's been a really positive thing, and they still have that interaction that otherwise just wouldn't be possible.
Yeah, I think that's a big thing through the foundation, this sort of idea of remote health monitoring. I know there's a kind of an ever-expanding programme in Albania, in Portugal, particularly around respiratory diseases. There's a lot of ways I think they're innovating, particularly people in the most rural areas. There are people who will go out there, they're not necessarily medically trained, who can get basic information that they need, and then that is sent back via mobile to either hospitals or universities who are running the pilots, and getting the information back again, rather than it being a separate trip to the doctor in however many weeks' time. They can just then text that information back to someone in the village or the town who has a phone, and
And that's particularly relevant for diseases that need to be monitored on an almost daily basis. So in Portugal, we have telemold oxygen monitoring solution, which saves the patient having to go in every single day and take various tests, and has been shown to be more accurate. And similarly in Turkey, we have a solution which measures blood sugar. You're able to do that using a mobile phone, and it's got a little measure of things, somehow it works. And if your level goes above a certain amount, ambulance is immediately sent to you. So there are some very, very clever, innovative solutions out there. And even things like blood donation now, that's been enabled by mobile technology.
If you do look at the use of apps in the public service, there is one, certainly in the UK, there is one absolutely standout use of mobile, which is TfL. And I think there's a big lesson in that, because that's something that it only has value really if it's with you. And yeah, okay, you can look it up on your computer before you go out, or you can wait till you get to the station and find it's closed. But actually having it with you and having the bus stop information and the tube information in your hand transforms your travel experience. And I think that's the kind of value that you're looking for in an app. You're looking at transforming the experience so it works with you when you want it.
The reason we've chosen apps for young parents is because we believe and we know from evidence that that's how they access information and learn things on a daily basis, and they're comfortable with that. And that's, they like to access films and texts, and we're planning to link our apps into social media as well, and also geolocation, so they can find local services that they need at that particular point. And we just believe that with young parents, that's the way to get messages across to them about lifestyle and healthy behaviour and so on. And also the personalisation side of things, which is very important.
Given that pregnancy and new parenthood is quite stressful, and it's one of those things where it raises the anxiety, is the value of the app, from your research, that having that app with you all the time can reduce the anxiety?
Yeah, definitely. It's one of the benefits. I mean, particularly young parents, young mothers, which is our target group initially. We're going to look at dads as well. They're more prone to anxiety, particularly with your first baby, depression, postnatal depression, all of those things, which have an impact on the baby's health as well. And if they've got this buddy and they can ask questions, and they can even make a note of questions to ask their midwife or their health visitor, all of that reduces the anxiety and the stress, which is good.
So I was just drawing in that thing about mHealth. I think you've got a very nice supportive pastoral application, if you like, but actually because you've got that relationship with the parent or parent-to-be and the app, there's also the potential to do that kind of early days monitoring, which is so important, because some of those things, if the signs are very obvious, but people miss them, or they don't want to admit they're not coping.
Yeah.
It might be easier to admit you're not coping to an app than it would be to your husband or partner or mother.
That brings up the idea of crowdsourcing as well. Maybe we should be looking at crowdsourcing more in public sector areas to give us the answers that we just don't have.
There's a brilliant example in the UK of the Education Select Committee using Twitter to ask for questions. They created the hashtag called AskAGove, and they asked people to send in questions for the Education Secretary. They then asked those questions in committee, as they do, and they recorded it because it's in a committee room. But what they did was went a little bit further. They put all of that stuff on YouTube. So they chopped it up into the questions and they showed the answers. So what was nice about that was it didn't just crowdsource the questions into what was previously a closed process. It closed the loop by showing what the answers were and giving them back to people. And that's the critical part. You can't just crowdsource and disappear. You've got to crowdsource and show what you've done with it. So actually we're not focused on finding a niche problem necessarily. What we're focused on is finding an effective solution to a well-known problem. It's turning it on its head a little bit. And part of that is making sure that if we're trying to call the public in to take part in this, and we're saying this is important, then the process has to include the feedback at the end to show them how their input made a difference.
So one of the key kind of considerations for us as a local authority is actually getting them used to interacting with the council in these new ways, but also still being able to kind of guide them through more face-to-face personal interactions as well, as and when the need arises.
Are you just seeing mobile as an additional channel, or trying to get some channel substitution? Or is there any work on really rethinking how you achieve the council's objectives and redesigning bits of the business?
It's a bit of both, I'd say. There's certain parts of the business which we can redesign in order to enable that, and it's primarily just online based with mobile as a solution to that. So particularly customer interaction, that was a big program which has been rolled out over the last 3 or 4 years in order to remove those kind of face-to-face or over-the-phone interactions. And then there's other parts where we actually, okay, but it's the mobile application that's driving it. I mentioned at the start we're going to be rolling out an app soon, which is a Clean Streets app. So basically you can take a photo of some fly tipping or some graffiti or whatever. Your location is marked, gets sent straight to our guys in the vans, all the technology's in the vans, and they will go out and clear it up straight away. So again, it's going back to that kind of end-to-end. If the guys in the vans, if the technology's not in the vans, it's not going to work. If the guys in the vans are overstretched and they can't get to everywhere, it's not going to work.
We know that 80% of the 16 to 24-year-old C2DEs have smartphones, which is amazing, quite honestly, but 20% don't.
Yeah.
And they're the 20% that most need our help.
Yeah.
So this is a huge challenge for us, and I don't know what the mobile phone operators are doing about it in the UK. I know you do some fantastic stuff in Africa in getting phones to farmers and people and health workers and others. But you know, this is a big challenge that we, you know, in the third sector have to address with you guys to get to that 20%. I mean, it's a group that's reducing. It will reduce eventually, but you know, these are people who simply can't afford a contract and a smartphone or even a mobile phone, and they don't necessarily have a laptop or access to the internet, and they're the people that most need that information that we can give them. You know, so we're having to do things like put some of the information on our website, but then not everybody can access that unless they go to the library or something. It's a big issue.
I think there's some evidence that gamification and reward is powerful. It's a powerful motivator. You earn badges, you earn some kind of credit, you earn some kind of peer esteem out of it. That's a good motivator to keep going.
It's a challenge. The problem is you're going to have those who are very engaged with it who just go to town on it, really get off on the gamification side of it, and there's others who just won't engage with it at all. Stepping back from mobile, we can use gamification in other areas where...
What if you're your team who fill the potholes and have a big QR code on the side of the van and you get points for spotting them? So you can track them or you can follow them around. I had a courier delivery the other day, and it had because it had a tracker in it, I could see where he was. And of no real use other than to reassure me that it's on its way. But
it's hugely beneficial. I mean, if you think you know exactly when your parcel is going to arrive, you don't have to spend the whole day at home. Productivity impact.
I think for public services you can actually turn it around. You don't have to look at the citizens as the gamifier, but the service providers. If the service is provided efficiently, the citizens can vote and therefore, let's say, get the service provider, give them a badge saying, yeah, you did a great job, and therefore there would be more competition in providing quality service.
I think the latest stats from from gov.uk is 25% of their web traffic is now from a mobile device. So there's a simple thing there about, you know, this is coming, how do you get the mobile optimised. But there's a broader question of, we're all talking about designing stuff and then trying to push it out.
The number of apps that actually get used on most app stores are a very, very small percentage of the total number of apps that are out there and struggle to survive, and that plays into your sustainability point. So how do we make it essential to people that they all make sure we're only doing it in the areas that are essential?
Well, I guess everything that saves people time and effort is something that people would like to have. Like, I don't want to spend 2-3 hours of my morning at the local council and not go to work for that. I think that's a huge benefit for people.
That's just brought up a really interesting point for me. And it's a little left field, but why are we assuming that when we talk about mobile, we're talking about delivery to a single device? Maybe we need to think about distributed devices. So I don't know how the network would cope with that. Would it have a SIM in it? Would it use Wi-Fi? Would it use fixed line? I have no idea. But just being able to channel some of our mobile activity into multiple devices would be an interesting way of looking at it as well. I did read the other day they're now using but the basic principles of alarm systems and the motion sensors around the house with elderly people attached to to the internet, that if it doesn't detect any motion around the house, it can alert someone. So a care worker can come and check what's going on.
They have the same thing in Spain with the Texas protocol that we're using here for domestic violence. It was originally kind of came out of Spain, and they're using it there for elderly users and disabled users as well, for that exact reason, sort of panic button.
Yeah.
I think there's a general point about older people, in that just because tech's going to be more whizzy and have more functions doesn't mean to say it's going to be more difficult. It should actually be simpler. If you look at the masses, I think it may even be the greatest user group for Kindles are older people, because you make text bigger. No, so while it's technology, there are simple uses that could be useful.
It's actually said to be a real boon for people who are sort of around my age and don't want to admit they can't read it anymore. So they can just, when no one's looking, increase the size of the text.
It's also actually really good for very young children who get intimidated by small text.
You take it from that point of view, mobile drives the system change, but the system change can't work without organisational transformation. And organisational transformation can't work without personal transformation. So actually we have to change the whole way we approach it. And then you go right round to the front end again. The mobile apps won't be adopted unless people change the way they work. And they'll change the way they work because it's better, faster, cheaper. There's an incentive to do it.
So how do we drive that change? Through the existing infrastructure, the existing organisational cultures, the mindset of the relationship between the customer and the service, the service provider.
So the way we have the way our society works now is fundamentally different to the way it was even 10 years ago. Totally different. So when we're going into the world with mobile, that's just one of the changes, one of the absolute paradigm shifts in the way that we work, is this information is now in our hand.
What we're doing with our apps and what we do with all of our resources that we produce for customers or parents is we co-develop them with the health professionals. So both the frontline workers, which might be midwives, health visitors, whatever, but also with the sort of the leaders in those fields, so that the Royal Colleges of Nursing and Midwifery and so on. So we've got the high level endorsement, and we also work on the ground with the health professionals to get their input. You know, what are the challenges for them in reaching certain groups of parents? And you know, what is the content we should have in these resources? So we work very, very closely with them. We then work with them to embed those products into their service delivery. So they have issues. I mean, the NHS loses a huge amount of money on people who just don't turn up to appointments, NDAs. Sorry, do not attend, DNAs, do not attend. And that's a huge amount of money just wasted, and certain groups are particularly bad at it. So there's a clear benefit to those health workers in working with us to come up with a solution that reduces do not attend and saves the NHS a lot of money and them a lot of wasted time. So that's always been part of our approach to developing any product, you know, whether it's a DVD or an app or anything.
Is there any examples from across Europe that we can take and apply here, or vice versa, in the mobile arena and public sector, that we can learn from what has really worked well?
Hamburg's doing some interesting stuff with mobile apps around traffic and parking. I'm not sure how radical they are compared to what we're doing here, but Hamburg's quite an interesting city for innovative mobile stuff coming from both sectors, coming from government and from the public.
I'm involved in a EU-funded project which is looking at using open data for transport and tourism into applications that sort of work anywhere. And there are about half a dozen cities involved. And the idea is that the mobile application should know where it is, find the data for where it is, and give it to you basically in your language. So you don't need to download a different application for each city.
If you look at Twitter, for example, it broke down a lot of barriers and brought down a lot of hierarchy, and I think also mobile apps could be, well, developed outside of the government, could be like a meeting space, somewhere where you can say what you think, and therefore also bring down the barriers, and therefore the need for government to get involved at a certain point in that as well. So you create this collaborative space.
So why not take the risk and do something different? Let's be radical about it. What if you could actually take the 40% cuts and produce a better service at the end of it? Wouldn't that be interesting? It's got to be possible. And not just because there's little redundancies and economic efficiencies, it's actually about seeing the whole model of what government looks like in a different way.
I think another key barrier is organisations like the third sector and local government and national government not having the technical expertise themselves to translate their innovative ideas, which they probably consulted with the end users on, into a practical application. And it's certainly something we've come across, and obviously the government's come across with the NHS IT system. Finding developers who can cost effectively, within a reasonable time frame, take your idea and translate it into an app that can be launched and used within a reasonable time frame.
And it starts to address your demand point. There has to be an understanding of what people actually want and need.
Yeah. The most important thing about that is not the app that comes out of it, but the ongoing trust that it builds.
So how do we get that going?
Well, I know what I'd do. If you say if money were no object, but in this case, it's probably not a lot of money, I would run a sort of Code for America kind of project, but I would make it, a condition of it is you've got to have three components. You've got to have techies, you've got to have community people, and you've got to have public service people, and come together for a day, a week. I'd probably stagger it actually. I'd have an initial day of let's have some ideas, and then let's narrow these down to some that can work, and maybe cross-fertilise some of those teams. So it's all competition. And then make it like a bake-off, sort of code off. And you start mixing and matching the teams with the different ideas, so you can horse trade and you can present and you vote for it and you decide on these things, and you iterate through a series of steps to the point where you've gone through the ideas. Now let's do a prototype, and 1, 2 or 3, depending on the funding at the end of it, gets funding to actually go and do it, and they get 6 months worth of funding or 3 months worth of funding in a citizen lab or whatever we call it, democracy lab, and they get to do it, and it's really high profile. And some of them will fail, but that's fine. When we talk about the importance of failure, we talk about the ones that failed early on and the learning that we take from them. So you take some of those ideas. The app that finishes at the end and works will not be the thing that they started with. It will be drawn from all the other ones. And I think that would be a beacon of showing people how you can actually change the culture. It does the co-creation, it does the partnership, it does the agile, and it's delivering something that people will want.
So how can mobile improve the operation within public services, which in some ways is a world that has not changed much? There's a lot of email, but they're just writing memos to one another. There's intranets are often libraries rather than collaborative spaces. I'm not sure about the working at home. So Melissa Mayer has different views on that.
I think I have read some pieces on how government has already implemented this and made quite a bit of savings on home working, but yes, there's a whole, again, cultural piece around whether people are trusted, whether it's how it works, how do you keep in contact. It's a very simple thing to do, it's quite hard culturally to accept.
I mean, home working means that you can only have sort of 6 desks for every 10 people, and you make an accommodation saving, and the head of accommodation puts that up. Whether it makes the organisation more effective, I've not seen any data on.
Is it home working or flexible working? So not the ability to work from home, but the ability to work from anywhere. I guess that's the difference. So then you're making, if you're off having meetings somewhere, you're able to stop in a coffee shop and work from them rather than having to haul back to the office or to your home. It's that level of flexibility rather than one or the other.
And flexibility in the time that you work.
Yeah.
I think the key with we've done a lot of work in New Zealand on flexible working and home working, and the economic benefit is absolutely clear. The cultural benefit is challenging because there are clearly issues with organisations. You have to relinquish a lot of control, and there are some jobs that sort of just don't work. They're much harder to flexibly work. You just have to be there. Drain cleaners, tricky to work from home unless it's your drains that are blocked. So there's some things that just don't work for it. But the big thing actually that for me that came out of all the work that we did, New Zealand and some in Australia, was that when local government or government takes a lead on it, it sets a very clear example that others follow. Right. So when local government says we believe in flexible working, working from home, open offices, co-working spaces, companies, particularly SMEs in the area, will follow that and pick up on it. So there's a knock-on effect. The benefits go beyond government and public service. We're also very bad at talking about work-life balance in the UK. But actually flexible working and home working is good for young families. It's good for people with children. It creates opportunities. And it reduces a lot of stress and anxiety as well as reducing costs. And I think this mobile is one of the enablers of doing it. I mean, I just work anywhere these days. The thing that does annoy me is that I have to decide which piece of technology to take with me. That if I do end up with the wrong piece of technology sometimes it's a bit of a hassle, but I guess there are solutions to that, and that's going to get easier.
And one of the things you see in the private sector often is it's a time when they're under the greatest stress that they actually innovate and change. You know, the public sector, that's the time when we slash our change budgets and our investment budgets.
Yes, that's one of the scary things at the moment. The local government should be going, wow, what an amazing opportunity. And instead it's panicking. Hopefully some people will eventually get that this is an enormous opportunity.
Can I just say
just before
one
we
final
finish, should we go around quickly to make sure everybody has had a chance to say their last point? Do you want to start, Andy, seeing as you're just about to say something?
I think what I'm most interested in the process you're going through here, because we've been talking about system-wide, system change. Where's the fertile ground? Is it M-Health? Is it education? Is it local authority? Is it planning? Transport's come up a lot. And then when we know where the fertile ground is, why is that?
Yeah.
And go for the ones we're doing and draw out those lessons. I think that's what I'm really looking forward to in doing this.
The bit that I personally am most excited about, which we sort of touched on, is this holding government to account, but also that the pressure of creating new services from the public and how mobile technology can do that. I think there's lots of really interesting things going on with that, but as in the next few years we'll see a lot more of that kind of change.
I guess for me, one of the biggest challenges is bridging that gap between the idea, the great idea, and the content and the delivery, and how we can do that better by working with technical people in a more effective way.
I think what I found quite interesting, and I take with me from this workshop as well, is this whole point about collaboration, and I think this is also very important for people who apply for these awards, who look, what kind of people do we need to involve? There can't be only the entrepreneur developing an app for a government or for a local council. There can't be only the local council developing an app for the citizens or the customers. It needs to be a collaborative approach, and only then it will work.
The challenges we face with the austerity measures being introduced gives us an opportunity to embrace that collaboration, shared support services between boroughs, between numbers of boroughs, with a common infrastructure which is invested in at the start in order to enable the solutions which are and shared in knowledge and expertise between more than just the pool of talent available within the confines of your own borough.
The big thing for me is how can, in a time of public cuts and austerity, how can you ignore the enormous resource that's out there? There's huge potential. So it's about partnerships and collaboration and working smarter. And it's about breaking down those old silos of power.
Brilliant. That's a great summary, I think, of the workshop.
Okay.
Thank you very much.